The slap echoed across the firing range like a gunshot, sharp and unmistakable even over the distant pop of weapons fire. Lieutenant Lydia Stone's head snapped to the side, the metallic taste of blood blooming in her mouth where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. The M4 rifle she'd been holding clattered to the concrete, still hot from the drill she'd just completed. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The 4 contractors standing around her seemed frozen, as if some part of their lizard brains had just realized they'd made a catastrophic mistake. Staff Sergeant Derek Vance, the one who'd struck her, was breathing hard, his hand still raised, face red with the kind of rage that came from wounded pride and too much testosterone. "You don't embarrass me in front of my men," he hissed, stepping closer. "I don't care what your rank is. I don't care what you think you are. On this range, I'm in charge, and you follow my—" He didn't get to finish the sentence. Lydia's response was surgical, devastating, and over before most witnesses could process what they were seeing. One moment, she was the struck victim, head down, seemingly cowed. The next, she was violence incarnate, and Derek Vance was discovering that hitting a Navy SEAL, even one who'd been standing there unarmed, had consequences that would haunt him for the rest of his considerably shortened career. But before we show you what happens when someone makes the terminal mistake of putting their hands on a Tier 1 operator, drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because what unfolds in the next 7 minutes at Naval Special Warfare Training Facility Bravo will become the reason why an entire class of contractors learn to never, ever mistake restraint for weakness. Lieutenant Lydia Stone had spent 6 years earning her Navy SEAL Trident, one of only a handful of women to complete Bud S training. At 29, she was compact and efficient, 5'6", with dark blonde hair and the kind of unremarkable face that intelligence operatives cultivated. What set her apart was invisible, the way she moved with absolute economy, eyes tracking everything, quiet confidence born from surviving training that broke most men. Today's exercise at Naval Special Warfare Training Facility outside San Diego was supposed to be routine, advanced close-quarters battle training with a mixed unit of SEALs and civilian contractors preparing for an upcoming Yemen operation. The contractors were former military, mostly Marines and Army Rangers, professionals but not SEALs. Staff Sergeant Derek Vance was the problem. 42, built like a linebacker on steroids, ex-Marine with 3 tours and an ego that couldn't handle being corrected. When Lydia had pointed out his unsafe muzzle discipline during the safety brief, flagging his teammates during the dry run, he'd taken it as a personal attack. "I know what I'm doing, Lieutenant. Been clearing rooms since you were in high school." "Then you should know better," Lydia had replied evenly. "Safety isn't negotiable." Commander Patricia Hayes had intervened, but the damage was done. Vance felt embarrassed in front of his crew, Miller, Torres, and Crawford, and men like him didn't handle embarrassment well. The live-fire kill-house exercise went exactly as expected. Lydia's SEAL team moved through the structure with fluid precision, near-perfect score, textbook execution. Vance's contractor team was competent, but lacked the polish of Tier 1 operators. Their score was respectable, but notably lower. That's when Vance's ego shattered completely. "Run it again," he demanded. "Equipment malfunction." "No malfunctions reported," Commander Hayes replied. "Your score stands." She had an easier run. Different target placement, not fair. "Target placement is randomized and identical. Your score stands." Vance turned on Lydia, face purple with rage. "This is bullshit. You probably had someone feed you the course layout. Probably slept your way into that Trident anyway. Everyone knows women don't belong in special operations." The temperature dropped. Every SEAL present went still, predatory stillness. Lydia's expression didn't change. "Sergeant Vance, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. You need to stand down and rejoin your team." "Don't tell me what to do." Vance stepped into her space, using his size to intimidate. "You think you're special because you got some participation trophy? And yet here we are, with you unable to accept that someone performed better than you." "That's a you problem, Sergeant, not a me problem." That's when he slapped her. The slap wasn't even hard, just an open-handed strike meant to demean rather than damage. But it split her lip, sent blood trickling down her chin, knocked the M4 from her hands. For a frozen moment, the entire range held its breath. Lydia brought her head back slowly. She worked her jaw, testing for damage, then smiled. It wasn't pleasant. It was the smile of someone who'd just been given permission. "Thank you," she said quietly. Vance blinked. "What?" "I said thank you because now this isn't about hurt feelings. Now this is assault of a commissioned officer, which means I get to respond appropriately." "You're not going to do shit." Lydia moved. Her right hand snapped out in a palm heel thrust that caught Vance directly in the solar plexus. Air exploded from his lungs with a whoosh. Before he could recover, her left elbow came up in a tight arc, catching his temple with calculated force. Not enough to kill, but enough to ring his bell hard. Vance stumbled backward, vision swimming. "You bitch!" Her leg swept low, hooking behind his knee while her hands pushed his upper body opposite. Physics took over. 240 pounds of contractor hit concrete like dropped meat. "Stay down," Lydia said calmly. "We're done here." But Vance's pride was more damaged than his body. He rolled, reached for the training knife on his belt, rubber, but he wasn't thinking clearly anymore. His hand closed around the grip and he lunged up with surprising speed. Lydia sighed like a disappointed teacher. She redirected his knife hand with a textbook disarm, her body rotating to add momentum, sending the rubber blade skittering across concrete. Then she was on him. Knee driving into his thigh to dead-leg the muscle, elbow catching his jaw, palm strike to the nose that brought tears streaming. It was surgical. Every strike was textbook close-quarters combat, the kind taught for situations where weapons weren't available. Vance threw wild haymakers that hit only air, attempted grapples that Lydia slipped like water through fingers. She was always one move ahead, reading his body language, exploiting every opening. His breath came in ragged gasps now, desperation replacing rage. He tried to clinch, to use his weight advantage in a ground fight, but Lydia had already anticipated the move. She sprawled, maintaining base, then transitioned to his back. Her arm snaked around his throat, not a full choke, just enough pressure to make him understand how vulnerable he was. "You done?" she asked conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. Vance's response was to buck wildly, trying to throw her off. Bad decision. Lydia adjusted her position, sank the choke deeper, and Vance's world started going gray at the edges. His hands clawed at her forearm, finding nothing but lean muscle and iron determination. "I asked if you're done," Lydia repeated, voice still calm. "Yes," Vance gasped. "Yes, goddammit." She released immediately, rolled away, came up in a fighting stance. Vance stayed on the ground, one hand to his throat, the other braced against concrete, trying to remember how breathing worked. "Miller! Torres! Crawford!" Vance shouted between gasps, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Get her off me!" The three contractors had been frozen, watching their boss get systematically dismantled by someone half his size. But tribal loyalty and wounded masculine pride finally overcame shock. They moved. Miller came first, biggest of the three at 6'3" and 220, reaching to grab Lydia's shoulder and pull her away from Vance. His hand never made contact. She rolled with his momentum, using his own strength against him, redirecting him straight into Torres, who'd been approaching from the other side. The two contractors collided with a satisfying crunch of impact, going down in a tangle of cursing limbs and confused grappling. Crawford tried to be smart about it, circling wide to come at her from behind while she was distracted with the others. But Lydia's situational awareness was the product of thousands of hours of training. She'd tracked his movement in peripheral vision the entire time, calculated his angle and timing, knew exactly where he'd be before he got there. She waited until he committed, weight forward and balance compromised by his own momentum, then dropped low and swept his legs with brutal efficiency. Crawford hit the concrete hard enough to knock the wind out of him. Before he could recover, Lydia's boot pressed against his throat, not crushing, not cutting off air completely, just enough pressure to make breathing difficult and further movement inadvisable. "Stay," she commanded, the single word carrying more authority than most people managed in full sentences. Miller and Torres had untangled themselves, and they came back coordinated this time, having learned from their first mistake. They spread out, trying to flank her from opposite sides, using their numbers advantage properly. Miller's arms spread wide to corral her, prevent escape. Torres angled to cut off her retreat, boxing her between them. And Vance was getting back to his feet, blood streaming from his nose, eyes burning with the kind of rage that came from profound humiliation. 4 opponents, all larger and stronger, all with legitimate combat training, even if it wasn't to her level. The math should have favored them overwhelmingly. Should have. But Lydia was done calculating odds, done with defensive posturing, done with men like Vance thinking they could put hands on her without facing the full consequences of that decision. So instead of retreating, instead of calling for backup or attempting to de-escalate further, she attacked. Her elbow caught Miller in the floating ribs with surgical precision, the kind of strike that paralyzed the diaphragm and made breathing an abstract concept. He gasped, arms dropping instinctively to protect his injured side. She flowed past him before he could recover, using his larger body as a mobile shield between herself and Torres, her hand snatching a training baton from the equipment rack as she passed. The rubber weapon wasn't much, essentially a glorified stick, but it extended her reach and gave her options. More importantly, it demonstrated that she was willing to escalate, willing to use every tool available. Torres tried a low tackle, going for her legs to take the fight to the ground, where size and strength would matter more. The baton cracked across his shoulders with enough force to abort his attempt, sending him stumbling sideways with a yelp of pain. She stepped over him smoothly, positioning herself so that Vance and Miller interfered with each other's approach angles, basic tactics that made multiple attackers work against themselves rather than in coordination. "This is insane," Commander Hayes was shouting from the observation point, her voice cutting through the chaos. "All personnel stand down immediately. That's a direct order." But nobody was listening. The fight had taken on its own momentum, testosterone and adrenaline overriding military discipline and common sense. Pride had been wounded, masculinity had been challenged, and 4 men couldn't accept that they were losing to 1 woman. Crawford recovered, pushed himself up from the concrete, came back despite the clear warning she'd given him. Miller had caught his breath, was moving with more caution now, but still determined. Torres was circling again, hand going to his own training baton, deciding to match her weapon with one of his own. They were learning, adapting, becoming more dangerous. And then, Vance picked up an M4 rifle from the weapon rack. Everything changed in that instant. Training weapons caused pain and bruising, but rifles, even loaded with training ammunition that had reduced powder charges, could cause serious injury or death at close range. This had just escalated from a brawl into something genuinely life-threatening. "Vance, put it down!" Hayes' voice cracked like a whip across the range. "Put the weapon down right now or I will have you shot." Vance wasn't listening. His eyes were glazed with rage and humiliation, rational thought completely overridden by primitive emotion. He brought the rifle up, not quite aiming directly at Lydia, but pointed in her general direction, finger already moving toward the trigger. Lydia's hand moved instinctively to her Sig Sauer P226 in its thigh holster. Her thumb found the retention strap, ready to release it and draw. But she didn't complete the motion. Not yet. Because the moment she pulled real steel, the moment live ammunition entered this equation, the situation crossed from court-martial territory into a potential lethal force incident that would follow everyone involved for the rest of their lives. "Derek," she said, using his first name deliberately, trying to penetrate through the red fog of his rage to whatever rational thought remained. "Look around. Look at what you're doing. Look at where this is going. You put that rifle down right now, this second. You might be able to walk away from this with just a discharge and some jail time. You fire that weapon at me or anyone else on this range, you're done. Forever. Not just your career, your entire life. Don't throw everything away because you couldn't handle losing a training exercise." For a moment, just a flickering instant, rationality seemed to penetrate. Vance's finger hesitated on the trigger, his eyes focusing enough to really see the situation for the first time. The other SEALs had drawn their own weapons now, had clear firing solutions on him and his crew. Commander Hayes was on the radio calling for MPs and base security, her voice tight with controlled urgency. This had become an official incident, the kind that would have repercussions cascading up and down the chain of command. Then Miller spoke up from behind Vance, still clutching his injured ribs. "Don't let her talk you down, Derek. She disrespected you in front of everyone. She put hands on you, embarrassed you in front of the whole team. You have every right to defend yourself, every right to respond to aggression with force." It was possibly the worst thing anyone could have said at that moment. Instead of diffusing the situation, Miller's words reinforced Vance's rage, validated his wounded pride, gave permission to his worst impulses. Vance's face hardened again, jaw clenching, finger tightening on the trigger. Lydia didn't wait to see if he'd actually fire. She moved. She crossed the 10-foot distance between them in an explosive burst of speed that caught everyone off guard, her body low and angled to present minimal target profile. The rifle cracked, its distinctive sharp report echoing across the range. The training round hissed past where her head had been a fraction of a second earlier, close enough that she felt the displacement of air, close enough that any hesitation would have meant taking it directly in the face. Then she was inside Vance's reach, one hand clamping on the rifle barrel and forcing it skyward, the other hand striking his throat in a precisely controlled blow. Not hard enough to crush his windpipe or cause permanent damage, but hard enough to make him gag and reflexively release his grip on the weapon. She stripped the M4 from his hands with practiced efficiency, the kind of weapon manipulation that became automatic after thousands of repetitions. Her thumb found the magazine release, dropped it, then she racked the charging handle to eject the chambered round. The rifle was safe in under 2 seconds. She tossed it away across the range, putting it out of play. Then her hand finally went to her Sig Sauer. The pistol cleared the holster smoothly, years of training making the draw as natural as breathing. She dropped to one knee in a stable shooting position, weapon trained on the 4 contractors who'd all frozen at the sight of a real gun pointed in their direction. Not training weapons or rubber knives, but an actual sidearm loaded with actual ammunition that would cause actual death if she decided they were enough of a threat. "Everyone on the ground," Lydia commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority despite her elevated heart rate and the adrenaline flooding her system. "Face down, hands behind your heads right now. Don't make me say it twice." Miller started to protest, hands raised but voice defiant. "We were just trying to restrain you." "You attacked us. We were defending dash. "On the ground or I put you there," Lydia interrupted, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Your choice, but you need to choose right now, this second, because my patience is completely gone." They chose correctly. Self-preservation finally overcame wounded pride. One by one, the 4 contractors lowered themselves to the concrete, assuming the prone position for detention. Miller went first, then Torres, then Crawford. Vance was last, moving slowly, his eyes never leaving Lydia's face, trying to find some sign of weakness or hesitation he could exploit. He found nothing. Just cold professional competence and the absolute certainty that if he made one more wrong move, it would be his last. Within seconds, base security vehicles were screaming onto the range, their sirens cutting through the afternoon air. MPs flooded out with weapons drawn, surrounding the situation with professional efficiency, creating overlapping fields of fire that gave the contractors no chance of further escalation. Commander Hayes approached Lydia carefully, hands visible and making no sudden movements that might be misinterpreted by someone running on adrenaline and justified paranoia. "Lieutenant Stone, I need you to lower your weapon and step back. Let security take over from here." Lydia held position for another heartbeat, making absolutely sure the contractors were actually staying down, that this wasn't going to escalate further, that she wasn't about to be surprised by some last, desperate move. Then she engaged the Sig Sauer's safety with her thumb, holstered it with deliberate care, and stepped back with her hands raised and clearly visible. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly, her voice steady despite everything that had just happened. The MPs moved in with professional efficiency, securing the 4 contractors with flex cuffs and conducting pat-downs for additional weapons. Combat medics arrived to assess injuries. Vance's broken nose was still bleeding freely. Miller was clutching ribs that might be cracked. Torres had a nasty bruise forming on his shoulder where the baton had struck. Crawford was coughing and rubbing his throat. All of them would be sore for weeks. Lydia submitted to her own medical check with patient cooperation. The medic examined her split lip, checked her cheek where the slap had landed, looked for any other injuries. Aside from some redness and minor swelling, she was completely unmarked. 4 men with size and strength advantages, and she'd walked away with nothing worse than a split lip. "Ma'am," one of the MPs said to Commander Hayes, a senior sergeant with 20 years of experience visible in every line of his weathered face, "we're going to need detailed statements from everyone involved, and we need to secure all weapons as evidence for the investigation." "Understood, Sergeant," Hayes replied, her voice tight with controlled frustration at how badly this day had gone. She looked at Lydia, her expression unreadable, but probably containing a complicated mix of approval, exasperation, and concern about the paperwork tsunami that was about to hit them all. "Lieutenant Stone, you're to accompany the MPs to give your statement. You're not under arrest, but this incident requires full investigation per regulations." "Yes, ma'am. I understand completely." As they led her away toward the security vehicles, Lydia passed the other SEALs who'd been present for the exercise. Master Chief Rodriguez, a grizzled veteran with more combat deployments than most people had years of service, caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod of approval. Petty Officer Chen grinned openly, not even trying to hide his satisfaction at seeing the contractors get their comeuppance. They understood what had happened here, recognized it for exactly what it was. Not a loss of control or inappropriate violence, but a demonstration of precisely controlled force in response to assault and legitimate self-defense against escalating threats. But there would still be consequences. Investigations, statements, reviews, probably some kind of formal inquiry. There always were when weapons got drawn and personnel got injured, no matter how justified the circumstances. The question was what kind of consequences, and for whom. The investigation took 3 days of intensive interviews, evidence review, and bureaucratic processing. Military police interviewed every witness multiple times, looking for inconsistencies or contradictions. They reviewed camera footage from multiple angles, the range's security system having captured everything in high definition. They examined physical evidence, the weapons involved, the training ammunition, the medical reports documenting injuries. They brought in outside investigators to ensure impartiality, including a JAG officer who specialized in use of force incidents. The narrative that emerged was clear and consistent across every source. Staff Sergeant Derek Vance had struck a commissioned officer without provocation during a training exercise. Lieutenant Stone had responded with appropriate force to defend herself. When Vance and his crew escalated by attacking her with multiple assailants, she had continued to defend herself while attempting to de-escalate. When Vance escalated to using a weapon, Stone had neutralized the threat without causing permanent injury, despite having legal justification for lethal force. Vance and his crew tried desperately to spin it differently. They claimed Stone had been insubordinate and disrespectful throughout the day, that the slap was a reaction to her continued disrespect and undermining of Vance's authority, that they'd been trying to restrain her for everyone's safety when she became violent and out of control, that Vance had only picked up the rifle because he feared for his life from her aggressive behavior. But the footage didn't support their version, not even slightly. The cameras showed Lydia maintaining professional composure throughout. Vance's increasingly erratic behavior, the unprovoked slap, her controlled response, their gang assault, and Vance's decision to escalate to firearms. Every witness, all credible military personnel with no reason to lie, contradicted the contractor's claims at every turn. On the 4th day, Lydia was summoned to the office of Captain Marcus Webb, the commanding officer of Naval Special Warfare Group 1. She reported in her dress uniform, every ribbon and device perfectly aligned, standing at rigid attention in front of his desk, while he reviewed the investigation file in silence. "Lieutenant Stone," Webb said without looking up from the thick folder, his voice neutral and giving away nothing. "This is the kind of incident that usually ends careers. Multiple personnel injured, weapons drawn on a training range. What should have been a routine exercise turned into a brawl that required MP intervention. The optics are absolutely terrible. The paperwork is going to be a nightmare for months, and I've got 3 different flag officers asking me what the hell happened on my base and why I can't maintain discipline among contracted personnel. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Webb finally looked up at her, his weathered face unreadable. He'd been a SEAL for 25 years, had seen combat in every major conflict since the first Gulf War, and had the kind of hard-earned experience that let him read people in situations with uncomfortable accuracy. What do you think should happen to you, Lieutenant? It was a trap question, one of those no-win scenarios where any answer could be used against you. But Lydia answered honestly, meeting his eyes without flinching. Sir, I defended myself against assault using appropriate force given the circumstances. I maintained discipline even when provoked by personal attacks. I attempted de-escalation multiple times before the situation became physical, but I also engaged in combat with 4 personnel simultaneously, which created significant risk of serious injury and damaged government property. If the captain feels my actions warrant non-judicial punishment, I'll accept that judgment without protest. Webb grunted, a sound that might have been approval or might have been something else entirely. You know what I think, Lieutenant? I think Derek Vance spent 15 years in the Marines, getting comfortable with a certain way of doing things. He got used to being the biggest, meanest guy in the room, got used to intimidating people into compliance through physical presence and aggressive behavior, got used to having his authority go unquestioned, and then he went private, surrounded himself with yes-men who validated his worst impulses, and forgot that there are people in this world who are better trained, more disciplined, and significantly more dangerous than he'll ever be. He closed the file with a decisive snap. Vance and his 3 stooges are being dishonorably discharged from the contractor program effective immediately. They'll face criminal charges for assault of an officer, reckless endangerment, and misuse of government property. Their security clearances are permanently revoked, and they'll never work in this industry or any related field again. The contracting company that vouched for them is under review for their vetting procedures, and they're likely to lose their DoD contracts entirely. Lydia remained at attention, waiting for the other shoe to drop, knowing that punishment was coming, but not knowing what form it would take. As for you, Webb continued, his expression still giving nothing away, the investigation found your response was legally justified and tactically appropriate given the circumstances. You showed remarkable restraint in not using lethal force when it would have been legally defensible to do so. You maintained fire discipline under stress. You protected other personnel from an armed threat. However, he paused, letting that single word hang in the air like a sword. However, you're being reassigned. There it was. The administrative solution. Remove her from the situation, send her somewhere else, let the controversy die down. Standard military politics. Reassigned to where, sir? DevGru is requesting your transfer. Webb's expression finally cracked, just slightly, a hint of satisfaction breaking through his professional mask. They've been watching you for a while, Lieutenant. Your performance scores, your operational record, your ability to maintain composure under extreme pressure. This incident, despite how messy it got, demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and tactical decision-making they value in their operators. You'll report to DAMNEC next month for evaluation and possible selection. Lydia blinked, certain she'd misheard, her brain refusing to process what he'd just said. Sir, did you say DEVGRU? The Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6, the most elite special operations unit in the United States military. The unit that conducted the raid that killed bin Laden. The unit where the best of the best went to become even better. I did. Congratulations, Lieutenant. Try not to beat up any more contractors before you get there. Webb's expression remained mostly stern, but there was definite amusement glimmering in his eyes now. Dismissed. Lydia saluted with crisp precision, executed a perfect about-face, and walked out of the office in a daze of disbelief and excitement. DevGru. She'd fantasized about it, of course, every SEAL did, but she'd assumed it was years away, something to work toward gradually through accumulated experience and demonstrated excellence, not something that happened because she'd defended herself against an asshole on a training range. Master Chief Rodriguez was waiting outside the office, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and a knowing expression on his face. "Heard you got reassigned," he said casually, as if they were discussing the weather. "Tough break." "Tough break," Lydia repeated, a smile tugging at her split lip despite her best efforts at maintaining military bearing. "Yeah, real tragedy. I'm absolutely devastated. Vance and his crew are being processed out today. MPs are escorting them off base within the hour. Word is, Vance tried to file an official complaint about excessive force and violation of his civil rights." Rodriguez shook his head in disbelief. Man's completely delusional. He slapped a SEAL and expected what? Crying? An apology? A meek acceptance of his authority? "Some people never learn," Lydia said, her voice carrying the weight of too many similar experiences. "They think the world works a certain way, that strength is just about size and volume and aggressive posturing. They don't understand that real strength is controlled, disciplined, that the most dangerous people are often the quietest ones, the ones who don't need to prove anything to anyone." "Speaking of dangerous," Rodriguez said, pushing off the wall and reaching into his pocket, "I've got something for you." He pulled out a challenge coin, the kind that senior enlisted and officers gave out to recognize exceptional performance or significant events. This one bore the SEAL trident on one side, and on the other a single word etched in bold letters: consequences. "I had it made special," Rodriguez explained, pressing it into her palm. "Figure you earned it. Every time some contractor or civilian, or even another SEAL, thinks they can push you around because of your size or your gender or their own insecurities, you pull that out. Remind them that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences come in packages they don't expect and can't handle." Lydia accepted the coin, feeling its weight in her palm, running her thumb over the engraved letters. "Thank you, Master Chief. This means more than you know. You don't thank me. Just keep making us look good. Show DevGru what we already know, that you're one of the best operators we've got, regardless of gender or any other irrelevant factors." He extended his hand, and she shook it firmly, the handshake of professionals who understood each other completely. "And Stone, when you get there, when you're running operations that never happened in places we never went to, remember where you came from. Remember that every time someone doubted you, every time someone tried to make you smaller or less capable, you proved them wrong by being exactly what you were trained to be. Don't ever let anyone take that away from you." "Hoo-yah, Master Chief." "Hoo-yah, Lieutenant. Now get out of here before I get emotional and ruin my reputation." 3 weeks later, Lydia stood in front of the mirror in her quarters, adjusting her dress uniform for the last time at this command. Tomorrow she'd fly to Virginia Beach, report to Damneck, begin the evaluation process for DevGru. The split lip had healed completely, leaving no scar. The bruise on her cheek had faded to nothing. Externally, there was no evidence of what had happened on that range. But internally, something fundamental had shifted. Not trauma or doubt or fear, but a crystallization of purpose and identity. She'd spent 6 years proving herself in an organization that hadn't been designed for people like her, demonstrating over and over that she belonged among the SEALs despite being something most people didn't expect. And she'd done it the hard way, through performance and discipline, and refusing to be intimidated by anyone or anything. Derek Vance had learned what happened when you hit a SEAL. He'd learned that size didn't matter when skill and training were involved, that rage was no substitute for discipline, that putting your hands on someone might be the last free action you ever took. The consequences of his choices would follow him for the rest of his life. Criminal record, lost career, permanent reputation as someone who'd assaulted an officer and gotten destroyed by someone half his size. But Lydia? She'd learned something too, something equally valuable. She'd learned that she could take the worst someone could give her: physical assault, professional disrespect, gang attack, attempted murder with a firearm, and still maintain control. Still respond with precision rather than emotion. Still walk away as the professional she'd trained herself to become. And not just walk away, but walk away stronger, more confident, more certain of her capabilities. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text, message from Commander Hayes. "Good luck at Dam Neck. Make us proud. And try not to beat up any more contractors. We're running out of paperwork." Lydia smiled, typed back, "No promises, ma'am, but I'll try to keep the body count to 0. She picked up Rodriguez's challenge coin from her desk, held it up to catch the afternoon light streaming through the window. Consequences. Such a simple word, but it contained entire philosophies. The consequences of training hard when others took shortcuts. The consequences of maintaining standards when others lowered them. The consequences of being underestimated and then proving everyone catastrophically wrong. And the consequences of hitting a Navy SEAL. Well, Derek Vance could explain that to anyone who asked, assuming he could find someone willing to listen to the story of how he'd ended his career by slapping a woman who turned out to be significantly more dangerous than he'd ever been. Lydia pocketed the coin, picked up her orders, official transfer documents to DevGru with a reporting date that was coming up fast, and headed for the door. Dam Neck was waiting. SEAL Team 6 was waiting. New missions, new challenges, new opportunities to demonstrate what she'd always known deep down, that the most dangerous people rarely announce themselves or advertise their capabilities. They just wait patiently, professionally, for someone to give them a reason to show what they can really do. And consequences? Consequences were just another word for accountability, for the universe balancing the scales, for making sure that actions, whether good or bad, smart or stupid, professional or assaultive, always led somewhere meaningful. Derek Vance's actions had led to criminal charges, career destruction, and permanent disgrace. Lydia's had led to DevGru, to the most elite unit in the military, to opportunities that most operators only dreamed about. She'd call that a fair trade. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. It doesn't need to growl or show its teeth or demonstrate its capabilities until the moment arrives when such demonstration becomes necessary. And Navy SEALs don't forget when someone puts hands on them. They don't overreact or lose control or seek revenge. They just wait patiently for the right moment to remind everyone watching that respect isn't requested or demanded. It's earned through competence, maintained through discipline, and defended with precisely controlled violence when absolutely necessary. Consequences. Always consequences. For everyone involved, for every choice made and every line crossed. And Lydia Stone had become very, very good at delivering them. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage,